Welcome to another rendition of the African American Legacy Preaching Series, where we bring you the very best across this nation to talk about preaching and about other things, but mostly preaching. And today, my very special guest is the Reverend Dr. Cynthia L, my longtime friend, my longtime classmate. 30 years, we go way back. So it is so great to have you, and thank you so much for taking the time to be a part of our Legacy series. I've been anxious to get you here, and you're here. So how are you doing?
I am doing wonderful. I'm overwhelmed. I am so excited and honored to have been asked to do this. I know the great people who have gone before me and those who will come after me. And I can't even imagine how I got invited to this, but thank you so much, Frank. I'm excited about the possibilities of our conversation today. Thank you.
Well, you know, obviously your wealth of experience, your scope of ministry well beyond the Ray of Hope Christian Church, your ministry to women across the country, Women in Ministry, the presidency of the Hampton ministers. I mean, your work, that's just the start of it. So I know so much about you, but just in case there are people in an audience that don't know, I want you to tell us about Cynthia Hale. Who is Cynthia Hale?
Cynthia Hale is a native of Roanoke, Virginia, in the valley of the Blue Ridge Mountains. I was born to Janice and Harrison Hale. We call my dad Hickey Boo. And they named me Cynthia, which means bringer of light. Wow. I'm wondering if they knew they were preparing me for my destiny.
Yes, they were.
I had no clue, though, as I was growing up, a frisky little girl in Roanoke, Virginia, loving life to the fullest, and I like to say dancing to the tune of life without missing a beat. That's who I was then, that's who I am now. You know, just tremendously excited about life and living it. Became a Christian when I was 9 years old. Yeah. And in my church, I was very active in the youth ministry. And people hinted around when I would lead worship on Youth Day or take some other part of the worship experience that, oh, I think she's going to become a preacher. I said, a preacher? And I would quickly dismiss that because I'd never seen a woman preach, never heard a woman, didn't know any women in ministry. But the other thing that I did was to teach Bible study at my high school in the morning to a group of students until a young man who I led to Christ, his name was Richard. Richard suggested that I could no longer teach because I was a woman. I said, I'm not a woman and you're not a man. But I stepped aside. And until I got to college, I went to Hollins University, Hollins College at that time. And my pastor, Alvin O'Neill Jackson, suggested that I had the gifts and graces for ministry. Then my chaplain, who recruited me to Hollins, said I had the gifts and graces for ministry. But I was a music major, so I was looking forward to it being an opera singer, standing on a stage, performing for thousands. I had big ideas back then. And, but I got involved in the Religious Life Association, and also at the same time, God was speaking to me and suggesting that God doesn't suggest anything. God letting me know that he was indeed calling me. But that was scary to me. So, you know, like most, I ran in my own way. I was a party girl. I enjoy partying. So I said, well, let me just party over here and we'll get back to you, God. Well, Alfred went on sabbatical, the chaplain, and we called a woman. And I said, no woman will ever preach to me. In a meeting where we were discussing calling this woman. Well, when she got there, I saw her preach, and a year later, I accepted my call. And so, but it took me another year after college to go to seminary, because I needed some time to just really get used to this idea. What did it mean for me to surrender my whole life my whole life. Single? Would I ever be married? That seems to be, for women, that's the question. If you're not already married, will anybody ever marry me? They didn't. I'm still single. Hey, but happy. Okay, I'm happy. I don't want to. But, and then just what did that mean in terms of my career? My father said, you're gonna always be broke, preachers of poor. I said, I don't wanna be broke. I want a fine car, fine house, all of that. I was a bit worldly too. Yes. But finally I said, okay, Alvin said you need to go to Duke. I applied, got into Duke. It was the best years of my life thus far. Wow. Because I did not realize, I love the study of the Word. But theology and church history, and though those were difficult for me initially, but just getting into it. And then one of the greatest classes I had was on the Holy Spirit. And I ate it up. My father said he knew I was called when I went to seminary, because when he called me and asked, where are you? I said, Dad, I'm in the library. He said, I don't believe it. I said, I am. I'd go to the library first thing in the morning and leave, and then go to class and then go back to the library. Well, after seminary, I didn't know where I was going to go. I applied for a 25-member church in Greensboro, North Carolina. They didn't select me. They selected a man who had not been to seminary, okay, and frankly, I don't think had the gifts and graces that I did, but that's who they wanted. So I became a federal prison chaplain in Butner, North Carolina, the first woman to serve in an all-male federal prison. Wow. And I did that for 6 years, and then I was called to start a church, the Ray of Hope Christian Church in Decatur, Georgia. That's where I've been now for the last 38 years. Wow. Wow. Having a ball most of the time. So
since we're at Ray of Hope, you've done obviously just an amazing job, and it's a model for all, not only just women in ministry, but men. It's just you've done a fabulous job.
Thanks.
So if you've had to suggest 3 things that you learned out of these 38 years at Ray of Hope that you might share with anybody that's either in ministry, give us 3, if you can, 3 great lessons that occur to you as you look back at those 38 years.
I think the first one for me is how important it is to know yourself and be authentically who you were created to be. In that setting as a pastor, obviously I was interacting with lots of people, and the challenge to be yourself, authentically who you are, to preach, to teach, to lead, to not be anxious, because there were so many things that I didn't know going in. And I figured out that if I didn't know myself, that I would continue to make mistakes or continue to be anxious and seek perfection, and try to outdo the next person, or be jealous, compare myself with others who were around me. So I had to learn to be myself. And I think that's true in any setting. The second thing that I would say is, once you know yourself, how important it is to empower others, to celebrate the gifts and graces, abilities of other people, and to empower them to use their gifts. That was one of the secrets of growth at Ray of Hope Christian Church. I did not do it all by myself. I empowered. I took the time to teach, to train, to coach, to mentor leaders. And so we released those leaders. As a matter of fact, I could not afford staff for years. I think I had a secretary and a musician, choir director. But I had 30 ministries at one point, Frank, and they were all led by lay people who had the gifts, the expertise, and they made it happen. But I had to empower them, had to help them believe in themselves, and also teach them servant leaders, because I chose people who knew how to do the work in the world, but not in the church. And so had to really empower them. And I think the third lesson would be how to fight.
Tell me about it.
Pastoring, as you know, is tremendously difficult because you're dealing with a lot of different personalities. And for me as a woman, there were men and women who, though I started the church and I was the first one there, okay? God and me. They came in thinking that they were going to run the church, or they would say things, subtle and sometimes not so subtle, things that would belittle me. And so I was always in a fight. Yeah. I felt like I always had to defend myself. Initially, it was with my cutting tongue. And I was, I was fighting all the time and just hitting against people. And then God began to teach me how to discern between what I needed to respond to and what I didn't, what I needed to address and what I did not, and how to. Right. So I began to fight differently. Preached like crazy on Sunday morning, loved the hell out of folks Monday through Saturday, you know, the rest of the week, and have conversations with those people who had opposition to me for whatever reason. That made life and ministry so much better. It's not that we don't fight for the right to be who God has called us to be. It's learning how to fight.
Wow, wow. Since we're on that subject, you know, any pastor has to fight, male or female, but I also believe that there are some distinguishing characteristics. So talk to me about what it means to be a woman pastor and fight.
Well, you know, a man, and this is my experience, a man can have opposition and speak back to it strongly, or a man can advance his vision or his style or whatever in a strong way. People will call that assertive. Right. But if I do it, if a woman does it, it's aggressive. Right. And we then are labeled in terms that I can't say. But, and the other thing that I know to be a fact is men will take me on in a meeting in ways that they may not engage others. I've had men, well, for example, I've had elders in my church who, rather than deal with me, they would talk to my comptroller or the executive pastor. We were all seated in the same room, having a meeting. And so one day my comptroller had to say to these men who kept saying, well, we really appreciate the work that you're doing and the way that you are running this, handling the budget and making sure that we're financially solvent and all of that. She said to them, sir, I work at the pleasure of my pastor and yours, the Reverend Dr. Cynthia Hale. If you want to know why this church is financially solvent and we're doing so well, you need to talk to her. She's the one. And so I feel like we always have to defend ourselves. We're not quite good enough as a woman.
You know, I want to talk about preaching, but since we're here, I want to stay here for a minute.
Okay.
You know, particularly in light of the fact of recent events where one of our colleagues preached at an event and got all kind of backlash, and they pulled the tape down off the, you know, the video down. So it speaks to, of course, patriarchy, and it speaks to the many women that I experience, I'm in relationship with, including my mother, my sister, my wife, my daughter, who are trying to do ministry, and the obstacles. And so I think that it's the responsibility of those of us who are women allies, is one of the ways they frame it, to name patriarchy, to call it out, but also with with women, not necessarily for women, if you know what I mean.
Yes, and you're right on target, because I've said for years that we can fight for our rights, but our fight is strengthened when we are supported and partnered with brothers who are our allies and will speak up, because you can speak to men and to women in ways that perhaps, and the people will hear you in ways that they will not hear us. So you're exactly right. We need your voices, we need your support. And what happened last week was an excellent opportunity for 4 Baptist denominations to show their full support of women by being present and accounted for. Right. 3 of them were, for her preaching. Right. And then after the backlash came, to be supportive, to go on record speaking against the kind of backlash that she received. It was a masterful sermon. Yes. Say that. Yes. You know, she has our full support, and not only does she have our full support, but all women. And here's how we're going to show you. By elevating the women who are presently in those denominations, doing the work of ministry and support, and have for the lifetime of these denominations, the history, to say that and to show that. Right. Yeah, you're really on target about that.
Well, you know, my thought about it, and of course, Gina Marcia Stewart is the Reverend Dr. Gina Marcia.
The Reverend Dr., my roadie.
And one of our PhD students.
Right.
My sense of it is that out of a generation, that 4 or 5 preachers arise out of who stand out by their gifts, their calling, who emerge. And I don't mean competitive, that's what I'm saying.
No,
but just affirming their gifts.
Right.
Rise above. She's in that pantheon.
Right.
She is a generational preacher.
Yes.
And I said, well, they just made the sermon historic. It will be studied for generations.
Yes, it will.
It will be studied for generations. And I said, I called her and said to her, I said, undoubtedly, you are not the best preacher in the country, if not in the conversation. I mean, just her preaching gifts are just phenomenal.
Yes, they are.
And that we needed to speak to it and celebrate who you are. And it's kind of, to me, like an uncovering. It's just a strange thing that your opposition uncovers you or exposes
it's
or
a wonderful thing,
reveals.
It's a wonderful thing.
So what I want to ask you about, what do you say when women call you who have been assaulted by patriarchy? I know you get these calls. So what do you say to women when assaulted, for lack of a better word?
Well, that's a good word. The first thing I do is to say, I hear you and I understand. I'm sorry that this has happened to you. And with all my heart, I wish that they hadn't had to go through this. Because by this time, I started in ministry almost 50 years ago. I think it should be over by now, but it's ancient. It started long before me. And so I'm sorry that you're having to deal with this. But I also tell them, if I might be a little spiritual, God works together in all things for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. You are called to this. You are called. And unfortunately, this is a part of the landscape that we are still struggling with. But let's find some creative ways for you to work through this, to get beyond the pain, and then to use it. Just like I have experienced rejection and assaults, I'm trying to now use it to help you and others. And so that's what I want you to do, is to, you have to go through the pain. You have to move past the grieving, get to the place of holistic thinking and attitude, because if you don't, you'll be bitter and you won't be any good for anyone else. And I know that personally. you won't be good for anyone else. And, you know, I really believe that the opposition comes to stop you from being all that God intended and certainly designed you to be. And so if you buy into that, then you are stopping the destiny that God has for you. You're hindering that.
Yes, yes, yes. Let's hit preaching. Let's talk about preaching, because it might be that preaching is one of the tools that we use to overcome.
I think so.
Even when they pull the sermon out. All right. But anyway, so would you say that preaching is one too? So tell me about your preaching, and then do you think that, you said that you preach your way, you didn't say preach your way through it, but we've heard that all of our lives, you preach your way through it. So tell me about preaching and its role for both women and men, but especially for women.
Well, I love to preach. And so through preaching, I tell the story, you know, about Jesus and God's love for us and the empowerment of the Holy Spirit. And so I think that preaching is the way that I have worked through my pain. Not bleeding on people, because you have to be very careful about that, but sharing the story in such a way that people hear it and receive the benefits of your story and your pain. I've heard you do it masterfully.
Oh, thank you.
And in sharing that, both men and women are helped in that regard. But I know also that preaching is a way of empowering the oppressed, people who have been misused and abused. I'm a justice preacher. And I preach justice and equality for all. And so I try to hit every segment of personhood when I am preaching to bring people to wholeness, whether that's spiritually or physically or emotionally or mentally. And so I think that preaching is a wonderful tool for that, because when the word of God goes forth, it heals, it delivers, it sets free. It empowers, it challenges, it inspires, it encourages, all of that. And so I think it's a wonderful tool for us to use to bring wholeness to individuals. And going back to the sermon, that sermon, I know why there was so much opposition, because Dr. Gina's sermon really spoke to people in every dimension of life and their pains, or the people who might oppress them, or who are oppressed by their own prejudice or discrimination or whatever, or pain. It spoke to that so powerfully and called forth in us the courage to stand up and to say a word for Jesus, okay? And that's what we as preachers are called to do, is to say a word for Jesus. And there's healing for us and the hearers in that saying a word for Jesus.
So who are some of your preaching mentors?
Well, when I was coming along, I didn't know any women, I told you. But Alvin O'Neill Jackson came to my church, and he was my pastor. And I was in high school then. And so his preaching challenged me, excited me, it captivated me. You know, it was simple and yet profound. It was exciting, you know, Alvin, I said, oh, wow. If I'm ever called to preach, I want to preach like that. And then Dolores Carpenter. Oh, yeah. Dolores Carpenter, a disciple woman. Yes. I heard her at a convention. So that's the first woman I think that I ever heard preach. And you know, Dolores is fiery. And so I thought, woo, I don't know if I could preach with that kind of fire. But she's also one that I really looked up to. Then I met Claudette Anderson Copeland.
What a preacher.
What a preacher. And, Frank, at the time, I was in pain. And she came to preach at New Birth Missionary Baptist Church, and I went there to hear her first, and then I invited her to Ray of Hope. But every time I heard her, for the first 3 or 4 times, I was being healed, okay? She was instrumental to my healing, because Claudette is one who goes and grabs you down deep, and just, and first she has to cut you, then she I said, I'm already in pain. But she cuts you with that word. And then she applies the salve and heals. So I've met others since then, and heard others, many others, but those are my initial voices that spoke to me. When I was in seminary too, I heard some women, and I tried to preach like them, and I said, no. After about a couple of years, I decided, forget that. I am not them. I must be myself. But when I heard Claudette, I didn't want to be like her in the sense that I didn't want to imitate her, but I wanted to have the depth of thinking, the thoughtfulness, the spirit, the power.
Yes, yes. So how do you prepare a sermon?
Well, I'm very methodical about preparing sermons. One of the things that we do every year at the Ray is to have a theme. And so I try to preach that theme. So like, for example, this year, the theme is Amazed by His Grace, Imagining More. Mm-hmm. And so this month I'm preaching grace. I like to outline my sermons where I'm going for at least a month or two. And so I'm dealing with grace now. So knowing what the text is going to be, usually, not always, but knowing what the text is going to be, I try to start on Sunday or Monday reading the text, starting to pray through it. I write it out, handwrite it out. I circle words that speak to me. I look for movement in the text. I ask questions of the text. Henry Mitchell taught us to ask at the end of the day, so what? Mm-hmm. And so I began to ask that question, so what? Because ultimately the so what is going to be the title of the sermon. Oh, yeah. And then at some point during the week, I start to read. I'm reading books. I'm reading commentaries. I take notes. And of course, I also am thinking about experiences that I've had or illustrations. Through the years, I've had to really work on illustrations because I'm not a good storyteller, I don't think. But people who hear me say that I am.
Yeah, that's why I was surprised you said that.
Yeah, but I didn't think I was. But anyway, so then on Thursday or Friday, I sit down and I write. I do not have an outline. I just write it out. And it flows like that. It always has for me, and I'm grateful. So I just write it out, and then I go back later to read it a couple of times and sharpen it. I find that I'm never through with the sermon until I have to deliver it. I'm ready to deliver it. Sunday morning, I get up and read through it one more time and make I may delete or add things at that point. I'm a full manuscript preacher, but often I'm in the pulpit and I don't use the manuscript at all. It's already in my heart.
I've seen you do that. Yeah. And do it well.
Thank you. And so that's my process. And I love preparing a sermon. I love that experience. As a matter of fact, when I've had a difficult week, I'm thinking, I want to put this all aside, get this all done so I can start working on a sermon.
So tell me about your most difficult preaching, a time that was really hard that you had to step into the preaching moment.
Well, actually, I've had several of those. And when I think about what in common what all of those moments have in common is my own insecurity. You know that I am not a hooper. I don't have a strong close normally. Sometimes I get excited, sometimes I celebrate throughout the whole sermon, right? But I remember being in a setting, this has happened several times, where people expected, or I thought they expected me to hoop. or to come strong at the end. Yeah. And I knew going in that I wasn't going to match up or live up to their expectations. So it was so uncomfortable preaching, and I felt like I flunked. Right. I mean, I just knew I did, and I would say, oh, I'm so sorry. And they're saying, what are you apologizing for? And then I've had a couple of my colleagues who have fussed at me through the years and said, that's not important, it's not important. But I felt like it was, and in some instances, there were persons who had that expectation, and they tried to push me on. And so that was not good, until I found my own voice. And again, learned to be my authentic self. And I remembered, what helped me in that was to remember the words that God spoke to Jeremiah. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. And I appointed you a prophet. I said, me? You know, I'm a woman. And God said, what does that have to do with it? I will put my words in your mouth. And when I remembered those words, I said, however I preach, whatever my style is, God's word does not return void. It will accomplish the purpose for which God sends it. And so more and more, I said that to myself, I got more comfortable, but of course more preaching gave me the opportunity. I'll have to say this, that in the very same place I had my worst preaching experience, I had my best preaching experience. United Theological Seminary. Of course, that's where we finished our doctoral work. And so when I went back to preach a second time, God showed out. God was so gracious to me. And I was so comfortable. And I said, God, thank you. You do redeem the time. And I needed it to be there. That has happened several times.
All right, so you gotta go back for me. So tell me about the time at United, because I was there with you at United. So you gave me the form of glory. You didn't give me the form of story. So when was the time? What was the occasion?
I was there just preaching for one of the intensives.
Okay.
And so there were all our colleagues out there preaching, listening to me, and. I did a fairly decent job. It was substantive. But I was so nervous preaching in front of them. And I said to one of them after I finished, well, I wish I had hooped. And he said, Cynthia, leave that alone. But anyway, I left that feeling. And then 10 years later, I was there for another intensive. And this time I was honored. They gave me some type of award, and Distinguished Alum Award, and I preached. And I was so excited because I was just comfortable. I was free. I didn't care about myself at that point. I just wanted to get this message across. And it was my passion. Again, justice and equality. That's what I was preaching. And those are my best sermons, I think. Those and the ones on the Holy Spirit and love, family, those kind of things.
So tell me about being the president of the Hampton Ministers Conference.
Sitting on the stage for 16 years waiting to become the president. I am elated by this experience because I never imagined years ago that I would become the president. I preached there for the women in ministry, George E. Crowley, women in ministry. That was a terrible experience too,
Well, tell me about that on the way to tell me, but tell me about that. Tell me about that on the way.
You want to hear about all my fault? No, I'm just kidding.
No, it's just.
But seriously, what happened that day was I wrote a brand new sermon. I was so excited about it. Now they tell you don't preach a brand new sermon.
That's what you said.
But they didn't tell me.
Right.
Okay?
I got it.
They did not tell me that.
I got it.
And so I had this sermon. The other thing that happened is the officers called a meeting of the leadership team, which meant none of the officers were there to hear me preach. Wow. Most of the people weren't there. There may have been 20 people in the audience.
Are you serious? Wow. Yeah, okay.
But I tell you this, John Bryan and Forbes were in the audience. And when I finished, they came up and encouraged and loved on me and told me what a wonderful sermon it was. I knew differently, but I felt differently. This is so good. I could just tell the truth. I don't know that I've told anybody this.
Yeah, that's what we tell the truth.
Yeah, so, hey.
We helping some people.
Say, we helping somebody.
You helping a whole lot of people.
I'm helping myself. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. So now we're talking 16 years, 17 years later, and I become the president. And the first night I do the president's address, and I stand up there, and I'm no longer intimidated. It feels like I'm in my pulpit at home. My members are sitting there. My colleagues and friends are on the stage. They're all over. There may be some detractors. I don't know. I don't care. Because God said, this is your moment. This is the time for you to speak on my behalf in this setting. And so it was a glorious time. It was, and leading, being the president of Hampton Ministers Conference, having people say, Madam President.
I used to say that to you, Madam President.
Madam President is thrilling, but I think the greatest joy for me is just being able to represent the women. I am a womanist, I love women, I empower women, I speak for women, I fight for women. And so standing there, I felt like I was representing the sisters. And I also had as many women on that program as I could. As a matter of fact, some people said they weren't coming because I had too many women on the program. And they didn't come.
Yeah, it's sad.
I'm so sorry they missed. It was a stellar program with men and women. Oh my gosh.
It was. We diminish the kingdom when we exclude the whole group's gift mix.
That's right.
Just the beauty of the gift mix. Which I want to ask you about legacy. And I wanted to, of course, I believe that, you do so many things outside of beyond which the things that we've just talked about. You support so many causes. I mean, you're active, How do you see your legacy, or what would, and I don't want you to be, bashful. Sometimes, we're modest. I want you to tell the truth. So as we've been around the block enough through the various stages. And so now I'm thinking about legacy.
Yes.
So what would you like your legacy to be, or what are you thinking about legacy, or respond to me in the arena of legacy? What are you thinking about your legacy?
When I think about my legacy, I certainly want to be remembered for having founded Ray of Hope Christian Church as a strong, progressive church that met the needs of the whole person. Yes. So we have a health clinic, we've done housing, education is important to us. So I want to be remembered for all of that. And I also want to be remembered by my university, Hollins. As a matter of fact, they've shared with me that they are going to develop a holistic wellness center and they're going to call it the Cynthia L. Hale Wellness Center. And when I heard that, I was like, what? Me? That's a part of the legacy. Having gone to Hollins and graduated from there 48 years ago, the whole experience of racism and sexism and classism, I met that head on in the early years and continue to seek ways to help the young women who are there not have to go through that experience. And so that's a part of the legacy that I hope to leave behind. And then in the larger church, I want it to be said that Cynthia loved people, everybody. And so, you know, I don't need to have a billboard for this, but I was explaining the other day when someone said, how can I make a difference? They asked me, how can I make a difference? Speak to people, be kind to people, show up for people, encourage them, fight for people. And so, you know, when there's a cause that I strongly believe in, like right now, my cause is ceasefire in Gaza. I want that to happen now. I want the fighting to stop. I want the hostages to be returned. I want innocent people to stop dying. I want folks to stop being displaced from their homes, hungry, starving on the streets, unable to get medical attention. I want all of that to stop. I am for wholeness, both for the people of Israel and the Palestinians. I want both of them to be whole and complete. So that's, when I think about legacy, that's it.
Given that you've given us such generous time in your schedule and that you've traveled all this way to come here to be with us, sometimes there are things that I have not asked that you might want to say. So I want to make time for whatever was ever on your heart to say. We have a broad audience. We have a broad international audience who watches these. It's amazing to me how many people watch these videos and watch them all over the globe. So if God's laid anything, or you prepared for this interview or in our discussion and such, so just in case I didn't ask you something that you really thought was really important to say, what might that be?
I want to say how much I appreciate you. Frank, from the moment that I met you, I realized that you have a heart for preaching, for people, for holistic living and life. And you've done it at all levels. Having finished the D-Min with you, you challenged me at that point. We finished first in that class.
Yes, we did.
So I'm tremendously proud of you, but this moment right now is when I'm feeling the proudest, because through this series, this legacy series on preaching, you are allowing the world to see who we are, particularly as African American preachers. You're giving voice to those of us who, while we stand on stages, sometimes we are not able to say what we need to say. And as I said earlier, it brings healing to us as well as to those who hear us. So thank you, because I know that you do all that you do at great sacrifice. It is not easy. But I want you to know, my brother and my friend, that I love you and I appreciate you. And I pray for you. And I want you to run on, continue this work.
This is a John Richard Bryan and James Ford moment of encouragement, and I thank you for it. And I might say to our audience, you all probably don't forget this. I think I came to Atlanta. I don't know if I was preaching for you. I don't know what I was doing that. I came to Atlanta. We had dinner, And I was going through a very difficult time, Mississippi Boulevard, very difficult time. And you said something to the effect of, you were meant for the academy anyway, or you,
I sure did.
like your gifts are.
That's right.
You know, and so I heard you, and that was one of the factors into the transition into this kind of work. Now, I think pastoring was necessary.
I think so.
To do this kind of work, because I think as a scholar, it's different when you've been a pastor and then become a scholar, particularly 31 years of pastoring. I mean, you know, it's like, yeah, I know pastoring,
Right.
but you're a different kind of scholar because the church is in you and the church is with you. And I'm not putting anybody down, because there are people who come right and go straight to the academy and they do a wonderful job, but that was not my journey. My journey was to come through pastoring so that we could do all this, and you were one of the people who were instrumental, not only there, but in the D-Min, as I tried to unfold what it meant to be a practitioner scholar, or a scholar practitioner scholar, whatever order that you know, I want to feel, and I want to church, and then I want to read, and I want to do theory, and been able to somehow coalesce all this stuff into one essence. People like yourselves, many, many years of ministry, you know, churches grew together, you know, brought you to do revival for me, you know, all kinds of years of connections and affirmation. And I'm deeply appreciative that you would say that, because there's something about people who know the struggle. So people see the back, they see the glory, they don't know
the story. That's exactly right.
And you know the story. So for you to say that to me, it means the world to me, because you know the story.
Well, I said some similar things to you when you were leaving Mississippi Boulevard, because I came and spoke. And all along the way, I've tried to encourage you to be your authentic self. And I think that you have been, even in the pastoral ministry. You had a strong church, New Faith. Mississippi Boulevard was a good experience, but this is your best.
I receive it. In Jesus' name.
This is your best.
I receive it. I receive it.
Yes,
This is, you know, it's kind of like, this is the way I say, that's what, you know, we're supposed to be talking about you, we're supposed to be talking about me, but, you know, it's like the pastoral side and the academic side converge right here for this PhD program and all the stuff we've been doing for this moment. And I'm so grateful to God. I am just so, it's just been amazing. You know, and I tell people what you would affirm, you know, it takes a life, it takes a life to build a ministry.
Right.
You've got to give yourself time. You can't, maybe it merges at 60. If you've been faithful at 25, 35, 45, 55, it'll merge into something that is absolutely beautiful. And then people start doing stuff like naming buildings after you. Now, none of us, we never reach for that stuff. You know, no vision.
But it comes to you. The word is true. Your latter days
you preaching now.
will be greater when you've done the work, when you've been faithful. Because God shows himself faithful to the faithful. And so that's what we're talking about. Yes, we're talking about me, but we're talking about us. And Frank, it's so important for us to encourage and affirm one another. And so this is modeling too for younger pastors, preachers, teachers, people coming along. How do we make it over? We make it over through the partnership, the encouragement, the loving on one another, the honest conversations that we can't have here, but we've had them.
Right. And not being able to not have it all together. I mean, I don't have to, I can say, I'm grappling with this, I'm struggling with this, or this ain't working, or this is what's happened, and all of that stuff, you're right. We do, exactly right. We encourage each other and uplift each other and celebrate each other. And we take the competitiveness out. If we're not, you know, I think we have sometimes too much competitiveness.
I agree.
I'm not competing for anything. I want to help you be your authentic you, and you want to be authentic me, and that's no competition. So You know, if you're on the Hampton stage, I can get there and shout. I don't need to be looking at the stage like, how did she get there? Or when am I going to get there?
Exactly. And I was there when you preached.
Yeah, you were there.
I was there.
I did a new sermon too, by the way.
I know it. But you did all right.
I didn't feel like I did all right.
I know.
I had two of them were fabulous. God bless.
And then you did a new one.
I did a new one.
Why did you do that when they told you not to?
Why did you do it when they told you? Know, I felt it. Yeah, I felt led. That's what I felt. That's what I felt. Then when I came down off the pulpit, I'm like, oh my God, I came down to that pulpit and I said, oh man. Then in the weeks and subsequent, people said, oh man, you did marvelous.
I thought so too.
Yeah, but you know,
but I know how you feel.
Right, it's the inner, as you said, it's the inner stuff.
There wasn't this confidence that you had with the other two.
Oh yeah. So anybody, this is just congenital advice here. Don't do new stuff, unless the Lord really impresses. It really impresses. So thank you so much for just the time and the relationship across the years.
Thank you.
Thank you for the support. Thank you for your ministry, your vision, your reach, your love, your compassion, what you had to go through. I think that 16 years of sitting on that stage to get to be the president is a window into all of your ministry.
Yeah.
That you had to pay dues in the back to be sitting here today.
That's right. Thank you.
And to have the regard, both nationally, internationally, amongst people that you have. As you're right, we pay heavy dues for it, and thank you for paying the dues.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being my sister across
the years. We're not through yet.
We ain't through yet.
The best is yet to come.
Thank you so much.